Thomas with Grey Goose Tiny Homes. Today we're going to be talking about how I install the Guide Gear wood stove into our tiny house. From the hearth to the actual stove, installing of the flue, and how we supported it on the roof and kept it watertight. Alright, today we're going to be finishing the install for the Guide Gear wood stove. So what we're looking at right now is the hearth I built for the stove, which is tile. You can see on a cement board. I think it's 5/8 inch thick. Bottom here. This is what's known as a heat shield. So the cement board, the tile, and there's a 1-inch air gap in between that I maintained using copper couplings. I think a couple pieces of EMT conduit as well. But it's about 1 inch thick, so that the air continues to cycle behind it and cool the temperatures back here, so it doesn't get very hot and that the walls don't combust. So now that we've got that, now we need to make the penetration through the roof, which is what I'll be working on today. Your hearth built. What you're going to do is find the center point for your wood stove, where the flue is going to be coming. The center of the flue is going to be coming through the roof, and so it needs to be about 6 to 8 inches from the wall. I'm using a plumb bob to make sure everything gets lined up correctly. And the reason that it needs to be 6 to 8 inches from the wall, your wood stove needs to be, is because you need to maintain a certain clearance to combustibles. So with the heat shield, without a heat shield for single wall pipe, generally the distance to combustibles is 18 inches. Every wood stove is different, but that's a good rule of thumb. With the heat shield, however, you reduce your clearances by about 66%. And so I only need between 6 and 8 inches of clearance for the pipe. So now that I've found my center point, I'm making the marks. I'm going to be cutting a 12 by 12 square out of my roof. And the reason that it doesn't need to be larger than 12 by 12 is because I switched from single wall pipe to double wall insulated pellet stove pipe. So I do make a 3-inch pipe that fits on the single wall pipe that comes with the wood stove. And this is important because the distance to combustibles is much less with the double wall pipe. So for this particular pipe, 2 inches is the distance to combustibles. So that saved me from having to cut out, like a 24 by 24 square, something I really wouldn't want to do. And so now that I got my marks, I'm making the cut with the circular saw. And so one thing to keep in mind is that after you cut the hole with the circular saw, you have your insulation. Then you also have plywood above your insulation, so that needs to come out as well because that is a combustible material. But once you get all that cut out, you can then line up your center mark again with your plumb bob and make a penetration for your flue to come through the roof. All right, so now we're working on the flue pipe. So this pipe here is what came with the wood stove. Now this Guide Gear wood stove piping is kind of funky. It's built upside down to what you would typically see because it's meant to be traveled with. And so these guys, there's a bell end on one side and it slides over the top of another. But what that does is it allows the creosote to come out of the pipe and to burn, and basically you get the creosote inside the house, which is very bad. So once I get this set and supported, I'm going to seal it with this high temperature flexible latex sealant. And hopefully that'll keep all the creosote out of the house. And this pipe here is different from the pipe that came with the wood stove because this is a double-walled pellet 3-inch pellet stove pipe. And so I did that in order to make my clearances around my pipe smaller. Because with single wall pipe, which is all this came with, you have to have 18 inches of clearance if you don't have a heat shield. So the pellet stove pipe, you only need 2 inches of clearance. I got plenty. This is a 12 by 12 square, so there's plenty of clearance around pipe. So yeah, that's what we're working with. Let you know the next step. So here I am on top of the roof. This is the flue coming out. The roof, obviously. And this guy here, like a little gasket. And I cut the size. You have these different options of size pipes. Cut it to size, slipped it on the pipe. Put a big, thick thing of caulk around the edge and screwed it down all the way around. Hey, thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. A couple more things I would like to note on the installation process. One is that after you install the rubber boot, there's a metal collar that slides over the double wall pipe that helps prevent water from seeping into the house. That's very important. And secondly, there's also some straps that you can get for the pipe that help secure it in the wind. That's also very important. And those attach on the outside as well. So I highly recommend getting those two things as well. So a little bit about the wood stove itself after I've used it a few times. One of the things to note is that the gasket that came with the stove actually burnt off in about 3 uses. And so I had to get an aftermarket gasket and put a new one on here, and it works very well. As far as how it works, so my house is about 23 feet long, 10 feet wide, about 220, 230 square feet. And when this thing gets going, I have to crack just about every window in the house just to remain comfortable. It gets hot. So this is more than enough to heat a tiny home, at least in Tennessee. And I don't think it would have any problem in other climates as well. This thing takes a regular sized 10-inch to 15-inch log. And if I load this thing up before I go to bed, it'll stay lit for 5 or 6 hours and keep everything nice and warm. So besides that, I do think this is a good purchase. One thing to note on the hearth is I would actually have built it a little bit wider. Probably about 8 inches on either side. This wall over here gets a little bit warm. And so eventually I will have to extend this hearth. Besides that, I highly recommend getting the Guide Gear wood stove if you have a tiny house and you're on a budget. This thing cost me only about, everything included, the hearth, the stove, the extra piping, the sealant, the caulk, everything said and done, less than $500. And it's hard to even get a wood stove in a tiny house for that price. So highly, highly recommend, as an alternative to the expensive wood stoves, getting the Guide Gear outdoor wood stove. Thank you for sticking around, and like and subscribe.